What if the true ruler of a nation wasn't chosen by its people, but instead designated as the guardian of divine law? When the word Ayatollah is uttered, our minds often turn to Iran, conjuring images of profound religious authority entwined with political complexities and tensions. Yet, beneath this weighty title lies a narrative stretching back over 14 centuries, originating from a pivotal succession crisis that fractured a burgeoning civilization and fundamentally reshaped the Islamic world forever. Today, we embark on a journey to uncover how profound theological concepts gradually morphed into governmental structures, and how a revered religious scholar ascended to a position of power, standing above elected presidents and parliaments. But before we delve into this fascinating history, please ensure you're subscribed to the Past Chronicle. After that, we'd love for you to leave a comment below, sharing any other compelling topics you're passionate about and would like us to explore. All right, let's begin at the very genesis of this story. What truly transpires when the most influential figure in a civilization departs, leaving no clear political roadmap for his legacy? In the pivotal year 632 AD, the Arabian Peninsula found itself at a profound turning point. Muhammad had achieved the remarkable feat of uniting disparate tribes that had been locked in generations of conflict. He had masterfully transformed scattered, often isolated communities into a formidable religious and political entity. But upon his death, an unsettling vacuum lingered in the air. This wasn't a crisis of faith, but rather a profound uncertainty concerning leadership. Who would now guide the burgeoning Muslim community? At this crucial juncture, there was no universally accepted instruction, no formalized succession plan, and no explicitly designated political heir within a system still in the process of defining its very foundations. Almost immediately, two distinct visions for the community's future leadership emerged. One faction held the belief that leadership should be determined through a process of consultation among the community's most respected and experienced members. Their reasoning was primarily practical. The nascent Muslim community required stability, and a consensus-driven approach among its leaders would best ensure continuity and cohesion. From this perspective, the first caliph, a term meaning successor, was chosen as Abu Bakr, a deeply trusted companion and the father-in-law of Muhammad. However, another significant group perceived the matter through a fundamentally different lens. For them, leadership was far more than a mere administrative role. It was sacred, divinely ordained. They firmly believed that authority must remain within the Prophet's closest family, specifically through Ali, who was both his cousin and son-in-law, having married Fatima, Muhammad's beloved daughter. In their profound view, spiritual and political legitimacy were not simply intertwined, but inseparable. This was, therefore, not merely a dispute over the mechanics of governance, but a deep-seated disagreement over nothing less than divine intention itself. Those who rallied in support of Ali became known as the Party of Ali, or in Arabic, Shiite Ali. Over the centuries, this name would naturally evolve into Shiite. Conversely, those who supported the initial caliphs would eventually coalesce to form what later became recognized as Sunni Islam. At that nascent stage, no one could possibly have foreseen the monumental scale of what had just been set in motion. What began as a contentious dispute over succession slowly, but inexorably solidified into fundamental theological differences, significant legal divergences, and ultimately, distinct geopolitical identities. Empires would rise and fall under these banners. Countless wars would be waged. Communities would come to define themselves not only by their shared faith, but crucially, by whom they believed possessed the divine right to lead after the Prophet. Today, Sunnis constitute the vast majority of Muslims worldwide. Shiites, though the minority at roughly 15% of the global Muslim population, form majorities in nations such as Iran and Iraq, and comprise significant communities in Lebanon, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and beyond. Yet, for Shiites, the intricate story of leadership did not conclude with Ali's passing. In fact, for them, It was merely the beginning of a profound spiritual and historical journey. If leadership was indeed divinely designated, then it could not simply be determined through political negotiation or worldly consensus. It had to follow a sacred, unbroken lineage. This deeply held belief would give birth to one of the most powerful and enduring theological concepts in all of Islamic history, the Imams. Imagine, for a moment, the profound implications if your rightful spiritual and political leader never truly died, but instead mysteriously vanished. For Shiite Muslims, the succession of leadership after Ali was far more than mere political inheritance. It represented a sacred, unbroken chain of divine guidance. Ali himself was not simply revered as a close companion of the Prophet. He was regarded as the first Imam. This meant he was not just a temporal ruler, but a divinely guided authority, a figure believed to possess extraordinary knowledge, the innate ability to interpret the Quran flawlessly, and to apply divine guidance with perfect wisdom to any given moment in history. The word Imam, in this specific Shiite context, carries an extraordinary, almost unparalleled weight. An Imam in Shiite theology is never elected by popular vote. He is not chosen by communal consensus. Instead, he is divinely designated by God's will, a sacred authority transmitted through an unbroken lineage from Ali and Fatima to their direct descendants. However, at this point, history becomes considerably more intricate. Not all Shiites agreed on the precise number of legitimate imams or the exact line of succession. Over time, various branches of Shurism emerged, each recognizing its own specific line of imams. Yet, one branch would eventually achieve overwhelming dominance, the Twelvers. Nearly 90% of all Shiites today adhere to Twelver doctrine. Their defining belief centers around a profound and enduring mystery. According to Twelver doctrine, there were indeed 12 legitimate imams, all descending directly from Ali. The 12th Imam, Muhammad al-Mahdi, was born in the 9th century. But unlike all his predecessors, he did not experience a public death. Instead, he mysteriously disappeared. Shiite tradition describes this disappearance in two distinct phases, known as occultation. The first, termed the minor occultation, saw him hidden from public view, yet he communicated with his community through a select few appointed representatives. Then, around the early 10th century, all communication ceased entirely. This marked the beginning of the major occultation, which continues to this very day. For over 1,000 years, Twelver Shiites have firmly believed that their rightful Imam is alive, but concealed by divine will. He will eventually return, they proclaim, near the end of time. When he reappears, he will restore justice throughout the world and guide the entire global Muslim community, the Ummah, through the final events of history. But until that momentous day arrives, a profound and pressing question inevitably remains. Who leads? If the Imam is hidden and thus invisible, who possesses the authority to interpret divine law, who is qualified to resolve complex disputes, and who speaks with authentic spiritual authority? This theological vacuum, paradoxically, did not weaken the community. Instead, it compelled it to evolve significantly. In the prolonged absence of the visible Imam, Shiite scholars, those profoundly learned experts in Islamic jurisprudence, gradually began to assume greater and greater responsibility. They became the primary interpreters of divine law, the vigilant guardians of orthodoxy, and the indispensable guides for believers navigating the complexities of everyday life. While they never claimed to replace the Imam, they effectively acted in his spiritual shadow. Over many centuries, from the renowned religious seminaries in revered cities like Najaf in Iraq and Qom in Iran, a powerful and highly structured clerical hierarchy slowly took shape. At its highest echelons, a new and immensely significant title would emerge, one that would come to carry enormous spiritual and intellectual authority: Ayatollah. If the divinely designated Imam remains hidden, who then dares to interpret God's will for the faithful? The answer to this profound question did not manifest instantaneously. It developed painstakingly, unfolding across centuries of rigorous scholarship, intense theological debate, and continuous religious refinement. Within the hallowed seminaries of Najaf in Iraq and later Qom in Iran, generations of dedicated Shiite jurists devoted their entire lives to the meticulous study of the Quran, the authentic sayings of the Prophet, and the rich traditions attributed to the Imams. From this deep and vibrant intellectual tradition, a clear hierarchy of religious authority began to emerge. At its pinnacle stood the most profoundly learned scholars, those whose unparalleled mastery of Islamic jurisprudence granted them the esteemed authority to issue definitive legal opinions, provide guidance to communities, and shape religious practice for millions. Among this distinguished group, a select few earned a title that commanded immense respect and spiritual weight: Ayatollah, which literally means sign of God. This term does not, it is crucial to understand, imply divinity for the scholar. Rather, it signifies a profound recognition. It is an acknowledgement that this particular scholar's understanding of Islamic law and theology is so extraordinarily deep and insightful that other believers may confidently follow his interpretations in both matters of faith and the practicalities of daily life. However, not all Ayatollahs hold equal standing. Some ascend to even greater prominence and are recognized as Grand Ayatollahs, representing the highest-ranking authorities within Twelver Shiism. Believers are typically free to choose one of these Grand Ayatollahs as their primary source of emulation. Marja, relying on his rulings and guidance to navigate everything from the precise rituals of prayer and fasting to complex ethical dilemmas in the modern world. This influential clerical structure exists across the entire Shiite world. There are Ayatollahs in Iraq, Lebanon, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and wherever significant Shiite communities flourish. In the vast majority of these cases, they function primarily as esteemed religious authorities, influential, highly respected, and sometimes politically vocal, but they are generally not the formal rulers of the state. Their power is fundamentally moral and spiritual. Their influence flows through guidance and interpretation, not through direct governmental control. Yet, there is one country where this relationship would take a radically different turn. In Iran, the intricate connection between religious scholarship and political authority would undergo a profound transformation. There, the idea that jurists possess the unique ability to interpret divine law would evolve into something far more ambitious: the powerful and revolutionary idea that they should, in fact, govern. But to truly comprehend how Ayatollahs transition from the quiet sanctity of seminaries to the commanding heights of state power, we must journey into the tumultuous 20th century. Before Iran was established as an Islamic Republic, it was ruled by a resolute monarch, determined to modernize the nation, by force if necessary. And it was precisely in the escalating tension between rapid, imposed modernization and a deeply rooted religious identity that a revolution was quietly, yet inexorably, taking shape. In the early 20th century, Iran found itself at a crucial historical crossroads. The long-standing Qajar dynasty had finally faded, and a new, ambitious ruler ascended to power with a bold, transformative vision: Reza Shah Pahlavi. He held an unwavering conviction that Iran desperately needed strength, industrial development, and robust secular institutions to survive and thrive in a rapidly modernizing global landscape. Inspired heavily by European models, he initiated a series of sweeping, often radical, reforms. Religious schools, for centuries the backbone of education, were marginalized in favor of a new system of state-run education. Courts independent of clerical authority were firmly established. Infrastructure projects expanded rapidly, and the military was significantly strengthened. Western-style dress was not merely encouraged, but, in some instances, forcibly imposed upon the populace. Then came one of his most controversial decisions. The veil, a garment traditionally worn by many Iranian women, was not simply discouraged, it was outright banned. Police were explicitly instructed to physically remove it from women appearing in public. What some proponents hailed as a great liberation, many others experienced as a profound humiliation and an assault on their identity. Reform, in practice, was largely enforced from above, often brutally. For its supporters, these changes represented undeniable progress. For its vehement critics, it amounted to cultural erasure. When Reza Shah was eventually succeeded by his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the project of modernization not only continued, but accelerated even further. It encompassed extensive land reforms, the granting of women's suffrage, aggressive industrial expansion, and widespread privatization. Iran grew significantly wealthier. Its capital, Tehran, began to rapidly resemble a modern metropolis. Yet, beneath this gleaming surface of progress, a deep current of dissatisfaction simmered. Some Iranians deeply resented the growing economic inequality. Others feared the pervasive and corrupting influence of Western culture. Crucially, many religious leaders viewed the monarchy's relentless secular reforms as a direct and existential attack on Iran's fundamental Islamic identity. This tension was further compounded by severe political repression. Opposition voices were rigorously monitored, brutally silenced, or summarily exiled. Among those forced into exile was a revered cleric whose name would soon become utterly synonymous with revolution, Ruhollah Khomeini. Unlike other religious critics of Shah's regime, Khomeini did not merely confine himself to opposing the Shah's specific policies. Instead, he meticulously developed a comprehensive theory, a bold and revolutionary reinterpretation of Shiite political thought itself. He posed a truly radical question. If the hidden imam is absent, who then has the legitimate right to govern? For centuries, Twelver Shiite scholars had predominantly understood their role as guiding believers in religious and legal matters. But Khomeini forcefully argued that mere spiritual guidance was woefully insufficient. In his groundbreaking view, Islamic jurists, the most qualified and learned religious scholars, possessed both the inherent authority and the moral obligation to rule politically in the imam's absence. He named this groundbreaking doctrine Guardianship of the Jurist, Wilayat al-Faqih. From his forced exile, first in Turkey, then in Iraq, and later in France, his electrifying message spread like wildfire through clandestine recordings, widely circulated writings, and robust networks of devoted supporters. His revolutionary vision resonated deeply, not only with devout clerics, but also with a diverse coalition of students, workers, and political activists who saw in him a powerful moral alternative to the decadent monarchy. By the late 1970s, protests surged, filling the streets across Iran. Demonstrations escalated into violence. Crippling strikes paralyzed the economy. The Shah's grip on power weakened catastrophically. In 1979, the monarchy finally collapsed. But revolutions are rarely straightforward affairs. The broad coalition that ultimately overthrew the Shah encompassed a disparate mix of liberals, secular nationalists, leftists, and religious forces. Yet, once the levers of power shifted, one group proved to be far more organized and cohesive than all the rest, the clerics. And at their undisputed head stood Ayatollah Khomeini, poised and ready to transform religious authority into concrete state power. When Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned to Iran in 1979, he was not merely arriving as a revered spiritual guide. He arrived with a fully formed doctrine meticulously developed over years, ready to fundamentally reshape an entire political system. For centuries prior, Twelver Shiite scholars had generally maintained a delicate balance. The hidden imam was universally acknowledged as the rightful ultimate ruler. But until his prophesied return, clerics understood their role as guiding believers in religious and legal matters, not actively governing nations. Political authority, even if perceived as imperfect or illegitimate in the imam's absence, existed largely separate from ultimate divine legitimacy. Khomeini, however, shattered that traditional separation. His revolutionary theory, famously known as the Guardianship of the Jurist, Wilayat al-Faqih, argued that in the continued absence of the 12th Imam, the most qualified Islamic jurist must assume full political authority. Not just advisory capacity, not merely moral influence, but actual, decisive rule. Government, in his profound view, was not a secular or human-made mechanism. It was, in fact, a direct extension of divine sovereignty. God had originally granted authority to the prophet. The prophet transmitted it to the imams. And in their absence, that sacred guardianship now fell upon the jurists, specifically those highly trained in Islamic law. This was far more than mere theological discourse. It was a comprehensive blueprint for seizing and exercising power. After the Shah fled Iran, revolutionary forces initially formed a provisional government. But Khomeini moved swiftly and decisively. Through a national referendum, Iran was overwhelmingly declared an Islamic Republic. A new constitution was meticulously drafted and approved later that same year. It embedded the doctrine of guardianship of the jurist directly into the very foundation of the state. At the apex of this new political system stood a position unlike anything seen in modern republics: the supreme leader. The supreme leader was emphatically not elected by popular vote. Instead, he was chosen by an assembly of experts. This body was composed exclusively of highly learned Shiite clerics. They themselves were elected by the public. Once appointed, the supreme leader would serve for life, unless he resigned or was removed under specific constitutional provisions. Khomeini, naturally, became the first to hold this monumental office. His powers were sweeping and extensive. He commanded the armed forces. He appointed the head of the judiciary. He exerted significant influence over the media. He shaped foreign policy. Crucially, he held the ultimate authority to override decisions made by the elected president or parliament. And yet, Iran did not entirely abandon elections. A president would still be chosen by popular vote. A parliament would still debate and pass legislation. Citizens would continue to cast ballots. But above all these elected institutions stood the supreme leader, the jurist guardian of the state, operating as both the ultimate theological authority and the supreme political overseer. When Khomeini died in 1989, another prominent Ayatollah, Ali Khamenei, succeeded him. The foundational structure of the Islamic Republic remained firmly intact. For the first time in modern history, the concept of an Ayatollah was no longer confined to the scholarly discussions of seminaries and the issuance of legal opinions. It was institutionalized at the absolute highest level of governance. In Iran, religious scholarship had definitively become constitutional authority. But this unique structure inevitably raises an unavoidable and crucial question. If Iran conducts elections and maintains republican institutions, could it genuinely be classified as a democracy? Or is it something else entirely? At first glance, the Islamic Republic of Iran shares superficial resemblances with many modern states. Its citizens cast votes for a president. They elect members to parliament. Political campaigns are conducted. Public debates take place. Ballots are meticulously counted. However, the political structure is profoundly layered. Above the elected president stands the supreme leader, the jurist specifically entrusted with safeguarding the Islamic character of the state. And his authority is anything but symbolic. The supreme leader commands the armed forces. He appoints the head of the judiciary. He oversees national broadcasting. He sets the fundamental direction of foreign policy. He possesses the power to dismiss high-ranking officials. Most significantly, he exerts profound influence over key institutions that fundamentally shape the political process itself. One such pivotal institution is the Guardian Council. This council rigorously reviews all legislation passed by Parliament. If a law is deemed to contradict either the Constitution or Islamic law, as interpreted by its clerical authorities, it can be summarily rejected. The council also meticulously vets all candidates running for public office. Presidential hopefuls, for instance, must receive its approval before they are even permitted to appear on the ballot. In essence, elections certainly exist, but they operate strictly within boundaries meticulously defined by religious oversight. Another critical body is the Assembly of Experts. It is composed of clerics who are themselves elected by the people. This assembly holds the constitutional authority to appoint and, theoretically, to remove the supreme leader. Yet, its members must themselves successfully pass through approval processes heavily influenced by the very system they are constitutionally mandated to oversee. The net result is a political structure that distinctly blends elements of democracy with profound religious guardianship. Supporters of this model argue that it effectively protects the nation's moral integrity. They believe it shields society from corruption or undue foreign influence. Critics, conversely, contend that it severely restricts political pluralism. They argue that it fundamentally limits genuine democratic competition. These contrasting views coexist, both within and outside Iran. But beyond all political theory and academic debate, one stark reality is undeniable. Since 1979, Ayatollahs have not merely advised the state. One of them has consistently stood at its very summit. So, what then is an Ayatollah? He is a preeminent scholar of Islamic jurisprudence within Twelver Shiism, a revered sign of God, recognized for his profound expertise in interpreting divine law. In most parts of the Shiite world, he serves to guide believers in spiritual and legal matters. But in Iran, this concept evolved dramatically further. There, one Ayatollah became the supreme leader, the guardian of a system where theology and governance are inextricably intertwined. And perhaps the most fascinating and enduring tension remains unresolved. In a nation perpetually awaiting the return of a hidden imam, how truly permanent can any form of earthly authority ever truly be? The story of the Ayatollah is far more than just a narrative about religion. It is a compelling saga about succession, about legitimacy, about the very nature of power, about the enduring, fundamental question of who possesses the ultimate right to rule. From the critical death of Muhammad in the 7th century to the transformative revolution of 1979, a profound theological disagreement incrementally evolved into a concrete constitutional reality. The concept of divinely guided leadership, once singularly centered on a sacred lineage of imams, was powerfully transformed into a modern political doctrine. In Iran, that monumental transformation fundamentally reshaped an entire state. It serves as a powerful reminder that history does not neatly compartmentalize belief from governance as cleanly as modern textbooks often suggest. Deeply held ideas about divine authority can echo across centuries. They accumulate power. Eventually, they crystallize into formidable institutions. Understanding the Ayatollah means understanding that for millions of people, politics is not merely a pragmatic exercise. It is profoundly sacred. And when power is so deeply rooted in faith, compromise inevitably becomes far more complex. Authority takes on a dimension that extends far beyond the confines of the ballot box. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you thoroughly enjoyed this video and are passionate about this type of insightful content, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any upcoming videos and can continue to discover more fascinating stories. We'll see you in the next video.